Hey friends, welcome back to the show. We have a returning guest today, which is so exciting, but we're talking about something new. The lovely, talented, incredible Mary Marantz, who you guys know if you've listened for a while and you were here last time she was on the show. I'm a little obsessed with her. It's fine. Everything's fine. We are talking because Mary has just published her new book, Underestimated, which I was lucky enough to get my hands on. Congratulations.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're catching me. As we're recording this, it is like a week and a day after launch day. And so believe it or not, this week is just as wild as last week was. Well, maybe not quite as wild, but yeah, as we were saying when we jumped on, like it feels like a wedding, it's like you build all this, all this time to it and then you do it. And then it's like, now what? But thankfully I have a lot of stuff, like amazing things like this happening. So I don't get sad that it's over.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're like exhausted, exhilarated, like all the things.
Yeah,
all the
that's
things.
right.
So thanks for being here and letting us celebrate with you. I honestly, it's funny because before I hit record, I was telling Mary, for our listeners, I was like, this book was for me. I talk a lot about a lot of the topics inside of your book, but I speak on them because I experience them so deeply. And even when I talked about, you're one of the first few episodes with the new podcast name, switching from So Here's the Thing podcast with Layli Amati to the Layli Amati podcast. And I had a lot of fear around that. I have a big fear of visibility that I'm working through. So it's a perfect time to talk about this because we can just make me the example in the like least comfortable way possible. But I would love to hear, so your book titled Underestimated. I want to know, like, what inspired that title? How does it speak to your personal journey? I've obviously just shared that, like, it's definitely speaking to my personal journey. So, like, how did this come about for you?
Yeah. For anybody who's just kind of catching up with me for the first time, the kind of 30-second, movie trailer or elevator pitch version of my story is that I grew up in a single wide trailer, a very dilapidated single wide trailer in rural West Virginia on the top of a mountain, which we talked about last time that I was here. And, my dad's a logger, 8 generations deep of loggers. My mom leaves when I'm 9. The ceiling's caving in, the floor's caving in. We had mushrooms growing out of the carpet at one point. So just like, trucks on cinder blocks in the yard, like every kind of stock image you have in your mind of like dilapidated trailer, it was that. And then you fast forward and I end up at Yale for law school. And that was, both a whiplash. And it was also sort of like the beginning, I think, of my addiction to the underdog story, or maybe just like the pinnacle of my addiction to the underdog story. Not in the sense that I got there and then I was suddenly like, okay, I've made it, I've arrived, I can relax now. It was more like, okay, this will kick off 20 more years of needing to be the underdog in order to achieve anything. And so that title, Underestimated, I have felt that way my entire life lately. I don't know what that is. I think there's probably some combination of like being the introvert, being a more gentle spirit, a softer voice, but you put me in any kind of networking cocktail hour, start of a conference, and you see sort of the cool kids kind of gravitate to each other off at the cool kids table. Like they clearly established the like, zone of cool. And you will find me in a dark corner talking to one other person being like, so tell me about your childhood and your deepest fears.
Literally.
So I did a post not too long ago where I said, don't set me at the cool kids table. The conversations are all the same. All this one-upmanship and rubbing elbows till the elbow patches fall off, looking over each other's shoulders for the next important person to come along. Instead, sit me in the corner, plant me like a wallflower. I promise you it's where some of the most interesting people in the room are. And so there is this streak in me that I think I come by honestly. I think my dad had this streak. I think my grandma Goldie had this streak, who I talk about in Dirt, of just sort of like needing to almost perceive slights, even if they don't exist. They exist plenty of times, let's be clear, but make them up if I need to, because that becomes the jet fuel that propels me to success. I could say a lot more. That's already a very long answer, but I'll just say I have felt underestimated my whole life. And this book kind of surprised me when I sat down to write it, because it's like, it's going to be 20% that, and it's going to be 80% when you do it to yourself. And I was like, oh, we're going to work on me. I didn't know that was what was, in store here. So that's kind of what the book becomes. 20% when people do it to us, 80% how we do it to ourselves.
I like so much of that I resonate with on a deep level. And I think so many people do, which is why I think it is such a good read for everybody, because I feel like the last time, I don't know if this was like the last time we were together, but we were talking about imposter syndrome. I had done like a talk on it. I don't remember where we were. We've crossed paths at conferences so many times.
Yeah.
And I was talking about how everybody has their own version of their stories that they write for themselves, and how you speak so beautifully into that and really help people, I think, process where they're at to be able to relate to those things. And so I'm so excited for people to get their hands on this. You talk a lot in the book about, I mean, it's even, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like front and center, like naming the fear, right?
Yep, that's in
What
the
does that
subtitle.
mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, what does that mean to you? Like, what does naming the fear look like in practice? What does it change for you? Why is it so important?
Yeah, so there's this saying that is, the fish don't know the water's toxic because they're so immersed in it. And I think it's kind of like that with us in fear. There's this part in chapter 2 of the book, which is Fear is a Broken Script. The whole book is based on a premise that fear's a really actually boring liar when you really boil it down to it. He's got 25, 40, somewhere between 25 and 40 broken scripts he uses on all of us. He's got about 14 different masks that he puts on. And so chapter by chapter, those become, I go toe to toe with each mask he tries to put on, procrastination, perfectionism, people pleasing, overthinking, imposter syndrome, even a fear of success. 14 in total. And so going back to that idea of I say in that chapter, fear can slip right in when it finds us, because it turns out when it finds us, we're already speaking some pretty horrible things to ourselves. And, it does have this ability. It's not a very creative force, which is something I've talked a lot about. It attacks creatives in particular because it's jealous that it itself is not inherently creative at all. But what it can do is throw its voice to sound like us, because if it sounded like Morgan Freeman, we could catch it every time. And to shapeshift into all these different masks. It's a slippery enemy. Like, you think you have your perfectionism under control, and then bam, here comes imposter syndrome or overthinking or whatever the case is. And so naming the fear is that ability. I am going to come in, and I'm, as your sort of like fear fighting big sister, I'm going to come in and I'm going to be this counter voice in your head. If fear's over here on one shoulder hissing in your ear, I'm going to be, I don't know, singing a lullaby or whatever the opposite of hissing is in the other ear, where I'm just like, remember the Edward Scissorhands problem. Remember the research riptide. Remember Oliver Twist. Remember the Princess and the Pea, which is going to make more sense as people read the book. But I kind of took in every chapter, every big face of fear and all the little sub fears that are in each chapter, and I gave them these really unexpected, visceral, visual metaphors, because I know that humans learn best from story and unexpected metaphors. And so if I can get you, it's like we interrupt this broadcast, to remind you that's just the research riptide. Then it allows you to be the fish that kind of comes out of that toxic environment and goes, oh, right, name it. I see what you're doing. I was on a podcast called This Changes Everything with Sarah Rice, and she said it's kind of like in The Wizard of Oz, who's the great and powerful Oz, who sends, the cowardly lion running. But we pull back the curtain and it's just this little man back there. And I said, yeah, it's like a snake oil salesman. He's selling us on this grift, this belief that given the choice between creating nothing and creating any kind of failure at all, we should choose nothing. And so the faster we can name it, it's almost like all of its power whooshes out of the room. It doesn't leave necessarily. In fact, it's probably going to try to show up more because it sees you doing more and more important work. But it becomes more like a little toddler in the room throwing a, temper tantrum than this really terrifying enemy that we should cower in fear because of.
Oh my gosh, there's like so much I want to talk about in that. Like,
yeah,
I truly, I can see every single thing that you've said playing out so clearly in so many of our lives, especially like you said, in the creative industry, and in particular, our listeners being creative entrepreneurs who are educators, who are stepping into leadership, who are taking stages and guiding communities. That fear of, and you talk about the fear of success a lot. I'd love to hear more about your guidance along that fear of success and how detrimental that fear can be, but how prevalent it is. I think that's something you do such an incredible job of speaking on as well. So I love your guidance in naming the fear and giving it less power. What are your thoughts on that fear of success? What are the differences there, and how can people identify that that's something that's in their way? I think that's one of the hardest things, at least for me, to have identified, because I as me, it's me. I have the fear of success. It was so prevalent years ago, and I could not bring myself to admit that I was like, no, I want to be successful. No,
Right.
I want these things. Like, how do people
Right.
overcome that?
Yeah, well, I love how you named it earlier, actually. That's a fear of visibility is what a lot of it comes down to. I write in the book, for some of us, there is a specter of fear far more haunting than failure. It is the apparition of success. And so there's an ongoing running metaphor all throughout the book of pushing this boulder up the mountain, being almost to our breakthrough moment. We can taste the rarefied air. We're within arm's length reach of that small wooden stake sign in the ground that says arrived and you are here to let us know just how close we've come this time. And then, like Wile E. Coyote about to get his comeuppance, we freeze when we make eye contact with everybody watching at home. And we self-consciously glance back down at ourselves. We blink, we lose our grip, we lose our way, and the boulder rolls all the way back down the mountain. The whole book, the very first sentence in this book is, for some of us, it just takes a little longer. For the life of us, we can't understand how other people can just decide on a thing and then they just go implement, execute, achieve, what, like it's no big deal? Elwood style, what, like it's hard? And for us, we just keep everything we've done our whole lives. It's just felt harder than it seems like it should. We feel like we're running through molasses. We're always pushing against this weight and this resistance that we realize at some point is ourselves, or at the very least is fear pushing us back down the mountain. And so in chapter 14, which is the fear of success, I talk about like it's, that chapter starts with like, underdog is a role of a lifetime. And what I mean by that is if we are not careful, we can spend our whole lives playing that part because we become addicted to the fact that the chanting masses will cheer for us when we're in the climb, when we're in the rising up, when we're in the, plucky underdog who has our hopes and dreams. But let somebody reach the top of the mountain and get everything they ever wanted and actually keep it. And suddenly we're out. We're unlikely story people, we're on to the next unlikely story. And we know that as leaders, we have a target on our back. We know that suddenly the people will go from, we're with you, we're, 30 seconds of glory, but there's a reason that every underdog movie ends in they get what they want and then the credits roll, right? We're out. As soon as you got it, we don't want to hear about it anymore. And so we know that instinctively. We know that there's something in our human nature that will cause people to turn on you the second you have a little too much success. Right? The Kansas City Chiefs, and they're not my team, so whatever. Underdogs. Oh, wait, now you're a dynasty? Everybody in the country is going to root against you. So there's just something in our humanity that says we want you to win, but not too much. And we don't want you really to win too much more than us, So we feel that. And it means that we're terrified of all those eyes watching at home and whether or not we have enough self-trust in our capacity, our craft, and our character to stay in the mountaintop moments when we get there.
So how do we stay? Like, how do we do that? Because that is, I feel like I feel bad for our listeners because I'm literally like, she's talking to me. Sorry, guys, but you might feel that way too. 100% the fear that I have, the fear that my class, it's so ironic. All of this stuff that I feel, again, like I said at the beginning, the reason I speak on these things, the reason that I'm so invested in learning about things like imposter syndrome, fear of success, fear of visibility is because I encounter them all the time.
Yeah.
But what you said about the feeling you have that people are cheering for you, but then what happens when you achieve it? What does happen? I think about you, Mary, and I think about when we met, you were already, to me, at the top of a mountain. Like I met you at my very first conference I ever attended as a creative. It was a very long time ago, like a very long time ago. And I think, from there we went to not knowing each other to becoming friends over a deep conversation. Again, like I feel like you found a wallflower in that moment. We had a really deep conversation that led to a friendship, that led to following along and being in the same rooms, but also combating those things. But to me, you were always at the top, but you never felt unreachable. You never felt like somebody who I couldn't just have a conversation with.
Yeah.
But for the people who have that fear of like, well, when I get to the top, I don't want to be like I don't want to be one of the people at the cool kids table, maybe. Like this has become a part of my identity. What do you say to them?
Well, there's a few different things happening there, actually. So let's kind of like break them down as I can think of them. One of them, the last one, we'll start with that one, is kind of this fear that really, I talk about it in chapter 1, even from the very beginning, starting over as a rolling boulder. I talk about it in chapter 3 about, what capacity do we believe that we can hold? And then I talk about it in the last chapter about success. And it's like there is this deep fear in chapter 1. I'll just say what I just, talk about in chapter 1. It's like, it sort of circles back to the end, like, forgive us if it is taking a little bit longer. We're doing the work. It's just that our work involves untangling a lifetime of limiting beliefs and generational traumas handed down to us about what happens to a person when they finally get more. I'm sorry if it's taken a little bit longer. It's just that for some of us, we've believed the lie our entire lives that more would one day be our downfall. Right. And so we can start to think that if we get that success, we will become that, exclusive meanie, the Regina George in the room at the cool kids table. We think we'll become prideful. We think we'll make it about us, or we think that we'll mess it up, that we'll, everything we're handed will turn to waste, not gold. We'll mismanage it. We'll drive it into the ground. It'll work for a little while, but we won't know how to keep it going. Or we'll just think that it will bring on the critics and there's nothing in our backbone that can withstand it, that their words will feel fatal to us. And so a lot of this idea, when we're talking about getting to the mountain and not dropping the boulder, even though we know instinctively that we're going to have to be a new version of ourselves in order to be to go from just mere success, the, underdog getting their 30 seconds of glory, to this leap to true significance where we leave a legacy and there's ripple effects for generations from the work that we've done. There's going to have to be an internal work, an internal change, and an identity that comes from a couple of different angles. These are sort of all the different chapters in order to withstand that kind of leadership. So, for example, we are going to have to do the identity work where we know who we are and we know what we stand for and we know where we're being called and we know what our true authentic voice is as an artist, as an author, as a creative. And when people tell us we should change that in order to belong, we have the wherewithal to withstand it and refuse to whittle ourselves down to the middle, to carve off these edges and extremities that made us so interesting in the first place, to hold with unflinching, unshakable truth that the people who love you will love you all the more when you know who you are and you own it and you show up in the world believing the world actually needs more of it. And the people who don't, were never going to get it in the first place. So why are we so worried about trying to get them to love us? Right? And so that's one area where we do this identity work. Another area we do this identity work is through the capacity piece in chapter 3. That self-sabotage is a shot glass. And a big part of that chapter is about when you think you have the capacity that is shot glass sized, anytime you get a little bit more than that, you will subconsciously shrink back down until you, I say, fit into the tiny containers you believe you belong in. And so we start to stretch that capacity into bigger and bigger containers by setting, Dr. Allison Cook, I quote her in all the podcast episodes and in the book, said to me, by setting small but important commitments to ourselves and actually keeping them. And as we do that, we're showing ourselves there is a grown-up in the room who can be trusted with all this. That grown-up is you. And so we build and we stretch and we stretch. And then the final piece I'll say to this is I talk in the book about excellence is the precursor to unshakable confidence. Some of the least real deal people I've ever met in my life, and I bet you too, Laylee, they did not act afraid at all. They did not act like they were worried at all because they had no skin in the game. They were just gathering up other people's ideas and passing them off as their own. They were just being a copy and paste of what had always worked before. They were not innovating. They were not pushing the envelope. They were not moving the conversation forward. They did not build with originality, integrity, grit, or tenacity. They just showed up and said, pick me, choose me, love me. I'm doing more of the same. They were not bleeding on the page for original work they were proud of. So why would they be afraid? So for me, one of the ways we begin to flip fear on its face the most, right when we catch it and we name it in the room, is by going, oh, wow, fear just showed up. Good. I'm about to do work that matters. Good. I must really care about what I'm going to do. And so excellence, as opposed to perfectionism, perfectionism is drawn out of fear and it says, I believe perfect can keep me safe. Excellence is born out of love and it says, how you do anything is how you do everything, and love of the work, love of the one person it might help. If I believe that this work is actually going to help people, then I can put it out there regardless of how the critics might come. Yeah. Woo!
I mean, I'm like, play it back, y'all. Let's hit rewind. I'm aging myself. Let's listen to that again. I think everything you said was so incredibly poignant and incredibly accurate. Like I know for myself, especially when I'm as a speaker coach, for example, when people ask me, oh, well, you coach speakers, you never have stage fright, right? Like you're
Right.
never worried. I'm like, no, I'm terrified, but it's because I care. I want to
Yeah.
make sure that I'm doing my very best. And I think it can be everything that you said about the people that we've seen who have this quote unquote, like success dream overnight story, whatever they have, but they're not doing it like the right way or what I would consider moving with integrity or creating with integrity. And
Yeah.
it makes me just like indignant. I'm like so upset about it all the time. And
Same.
I think that gets in our way too, is that I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, if they're successful in that, I don't even want any part of it. Like, I don't even want to
Right.
try.
Right.
What do you say to
Yes.
that?
Well, first I say amen. I've felt that way so many times. Like, I don't want to go swim with sharks, you know? I don't
Uh-huh.
want to go feel like I'm going to get, bitten every time I turn around and have to like put myself on these stages and in these places where I'm going to have to be around people that I do not respect.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't respect them. I
Yeah.
know I've seen behind the curtain, there's another curtain you can see behind, and
Mm-hmm.
I know what's actually happening and how you actually think about your audience or your customers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't co-sign, I don't endorse, I don't want to tacitly give my stamp of approval by being on the same stage as you or whatever. And then it's like, well, what's the alternative? The alternative is that we leave those spaces to the people who are not real deal, and another generation gets raised by them. Another generation of creatives, another generation of entrepreneurs, people who don't know any better and, won't find out for years just how much there is a snake oil salesman in the room. Right. And so that's another one of those things of like, to step into these spotlights, to step into these leadership spaces, you really do have to do the work to know who you are so that you're not afraid that that's going to get compromised just by proximity. That if anything, it's going to actually renew your resolve to be the kind of leader you wish that you had when you were coming up. Chapter 13 is Distraction is a Clock That's Ticking. And I talk in that chapter, it sort of opens by me talking about this econ class I had in college that was a main requirement to graduate. But the one fun loophole it had to all that main requirement energy was that attendance was optional. And so it was comprised of 4 equally weighted exams that had to be taken in class. But other than that, you did not have to show up. And so that's what I would do. I would skip that class to make margin in a very busy senior year calendar anyway. And I would just the night before each exam go to an all-night diner and cram and then go take this, Scantron sheet, fill in the little bubbles the very next morning. And I got 100s on every single exam, which I've just been dying to work into casual conversation. So much so that the professor actually stopped me on the sidewalk after like the 3rd exam when he realized I was never coming to class, but I was getting 100 on all of his exams, and he tried to get me to switch to be an econ major. And I did add it as a minor, but I didn't switch because I was like, philosophy is the much more lucrative path to success, clearly. But anyway,
Absolutely.
that whole story, besides just being a super fun humble brag, is to say this, and that is that class taught me, that experience taught me that it was how good you are, not whether you show up. That excellence alone should win. And I've spent my entire life being completely frustrated at the fact that in this world, excellence alone is not enough.
Yeah.
That the best speaker or the best author, the best book, the best course is not what wins.
Yeah.
It's the ones that show up over and over again. There's a Denzel Washington quote in that chapter that says, like, there are people less qualified, less integrity, all of the things we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing the things you want to do simply because they believed in themselves enough to show up, period.
Yeah.
And what I kind of say in that chapter and what I feel in this moment that I want to say is that this is why I am on a mission to help the people of excellence show up, because that whole chapter really becomes about how consistency wins and how consistency compounds over time and how there's these virtuous cycle people. Wins beget wins, momentum begets momentum. Up and up and up, that stock rises like a bucking bull market, decidedly to the right, to the, economies of scale running to infinity beyond, to a future we dare not dream of. So if I can get the people of excellence to show up consistently, because I think that's a lot easier to do than to try to convince one of these people who are not the real deal to become people of excellence, then I think we can actually get the kind of leaders out there that we want. And I talked about this, I don't know if you remember this, like 2018 at a Rising Tide leadership retreat, I talked about the difference between what I call true leaders and people who are just really savvy marketers.
I do remember this. I do remember this so
Yeah.
well. Actually, it's because I was on the panel for
Yep.
inclusivity and diversity.
Yep.
And your talk led to a very, very impactful conversation to me, which
Yeah.
it's so funny because this whole book, it is such a representation of you practicing what you've preached for
Mm.
years and the impact that you have had on a small scale of like one person, and that ripple effect. I talk about the ripple effect all the time for educators, for speakers.
Yeah.
And you're talking, I think, even bigger picture. And you have had that. I mean, you're having that in our community before your books even, before even you put pen to paper. And I think that's so incredible. But I want to hone in on, we have been in the same spaces, meaning we've seen the same people who
Yeah.
have had spotlights shining down on them, and probably both of us thinking like, this is not ideal. Like, how are we going to, and I think that's what drove me to create, the Creative Educator Conference and the Educator Academy and everything for educators to be like, you can do it in the right way. I feel like we are two sides of the same coin here, trying to accomplish the same thing. But I still hear the whispers. I don't know. Do you? Like, I still have that voice of, are you sure? Like, this isn't probably going to work out, because you don't have that quote, that Denzel Washington quote that people, I think that all the time. I have it written actually on a Post-it right here, literally all the time, because I'm like, but maybe I don't have what it takes to go out there and sell it the way that they do. That's the voice I hear, and I still have it. Do you ever have that voice?
Well, here's what I love about what you just said. And my voice is going to be slightly different, and that will make sense here in a second.
Yeah.
So in chapter 2, I talk about, because chapter 2 is fear is a broken script. And it's really like, so chapter 1 setting up the problem of why do we keep starting over, and why do we keep like balking at the ledge, flinching at the ledge at the last minute, instead of seeing it all the way through to step into the places we're being called. And then, chapter 2 is like, I need to tell you some character traits that you're going to need to understand about fear before any of the rest of this is going to make sense. And so one of the things that I say is that fear is going to attack you at the exact crosshair intersection where your gifts meet your story. And because it knows that you need both axes, whatever, to make your impact. Like if you are just out there using your gifts alone, then you are, what I would call this clanging gong or cymbal. If it's words without love, if it's works without love, you're just making a bunch of noise. And so your story is what informs your gift with empathy. And so my friend Kim Butler says that our greatest points of impact will come from our deepest places of empathy. So fear knows it needs to attack you at both. So if you have the gift of words, it's going to tell you that your voice doesn't matter. Your voice has never mattered. If you have the gift of helping people, it's going to tell you that to begin this thing you want to start would be selfish. You have always been so selfish. If you have the gift of being a visionary, to see people both for who they are and what they're becoming, where they are and where they are going, it will make you spend your whole life feeling unseen and unimportant. And so for you to say, here I am raising up a generation of leaders. Here I am raising up a generation of leaders who are going to do it the right way with integrity. For that voice in your head to be like, but you can't be as like salesy as they are, therefore you're disqualified. That's fear attacking you in your gifts, right? That's fear taking your gift and flipping it upside down as a liability. Fear tried to tell me that my intelligence is not a strength, but a liability. That I have to water it down, dumb it down, water it down, take it down a notch, make it more basic. 3 words on a graphic. That's all you can do on Instagram in order to win or whatever. And so all I hear is like, that should be like this green blinking light of like, go, like run towards that then, because fear would not bother you right there if it didn't know you were about to be a level 1 threat.
I gotta say, I have never cried on my own show before, but I had literal tears in my eyes, and I had to like look away from you on my screen. Y'all mark the date, mark the time. This has never happened. I've had this podcast for 6 years.
Woo!
6 years, and I've never once like cried. I really felt that in my heart, and I know so many people listening will, and I know so many people reading the book will. And I feel everything you've ever written has always like been something that is very like that people feel very deeply. I have Dirt behind me on my bookshelf right here, and I have Underestimated on my nightstand because I'm currently reading it.
Yay.
But that was incredible. I feel like so many people are going to feel that and feel that green light and say, okay, this is it. Like, it is time to overcome this. And I hope that if you're listening, you go pick up a copy of Mary's book, and also just follow along if you're not already following her. You share so much encouragement on a regular basis. And I think you help so many people stop not like, I don't want to say intentionally, but knowingly playing small.
That's right.
You talk about that in your book, which, I mean, I would love to just, I've like could talk to you forever. I do want to touch on that a little bit because I feel like that leads, that green light, right? Like, let's say people have taken those first few steps, but they're what does that mean to you, playing small? And when I say knowingly playing small, we say it all the time, right? I think a lot of people know generally, like, instinctively, yeah, I'm still playing small, but what does that mean to you? And like,
Yeah.
what's your definition of that?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying, even before I give a definition of playing small, I'll start by saying, kind of work backwards, that in my opinion, the great work of this book is to give you those visual, visceral, unexpected metaphors I talked about earlier, so you can jump out of the water, look around and go, oh, wait, this is not normal. Catch fear in the act, name it, suck all the power out of the room. It is also, and maybe this is the even like step 2 or like the second phase, it is to get you as completely bored and exhausted and fed up with the tactics of fear as you are with hearing the same excuses come out of your own mouth year after year after year. You know, in my second book, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots, the book opens with this at last exhausted moment. And it's like talking about how when I try to tell people you can't actually achieve your way into worth, they don't really believe me. Similar to when I tell business owners you're going to burn out if you don't slow down, they don't really believe me. You know, okay, grandma, you don't know how fast that can go, whatever. And then they hit a brick wall, right? Going 90 miles an hour and the transmission falls out. And it's like, oh, right. We are still human beings who need water and food and light. So you for yourself have to reach an at last exhausted moment before you'll believe me that achieving for your worth doesn't work. And then it's like, good, now the real work can begin. In a very similar way, this book is to be like, you know what? Tell me the thing that keeps you so afraid, that keeps you stuck. I'll tell you what page it's on. It has already been accounted for in the pages of this book. This is how boring fear is. And so if I can get you as exhausted with him as you are hearing yourself say, oh gosh, it's just not a good time right now. Maybe it'll be better in the summer, the fall, the winter, the spring. Oh gosh, people are so busy with school right now. Work is so crazy right now. We have a trip coming up. I'm starting this new thing. I don't have the time right now. I don't have the energy. Gosh, what if I start and I can't stay consistent with it? If you can just get like so grossed out, bone tired, exhausted of hearing it, then I believe the good work can begin. So we'll start there, kind of working backwards. And then I think that definition of playing small is anything you know you're doing. Because you're right, there is a knowing element to it. You know that you have this thing you can't stop thinking about that bumps you in your spirit every single day. Like, bump, bump. Hey, no, seriously, when are you going to write the book? Or whatever the case is. And you put it off for all of these very responsible sounding reasons that in your gut, are still just excuses. And so it's anything you do to hide in plain sight, to shove other people into the spotlight, to talk yourself out of it, tell yourself you're disqualified. It's anything you do that is not making good on the work that was actually prepared for you in advance to do. In my heart of hearts, I believe each one of us was given assignments, and we're being asked to be used in very specific ways and to impact other people's lives. So it's anything that says, I'll wait another year longer, and then the clock goes on ticking, another year goes by, and the entire world is worse for your absence. The entire world is worse for your absence. And there's an Oliver Wendell Holmes quote that I think about all of the time, which is, most of us, Laylee, most people we know in our real lives, 99.9% of them, I made up that statistic, but it's close. Most people are going to go to their graves with the music still inside them unplayed. Most people are never going to get around to it. That should rattle our rib cages.
That truly is like heart-wrenching.
Yeah. So anything that has that result, where you slide into the grave, you end up where you end up and you say, I have all these talents left, I never use them. Right? It's the opposite of an Irma Bombeck quote that says, I hope when I get where I'm going, I can say I have not a single talent left. I used everything you gave me. Yeah.
I just think that gives people so much to think about that I'm like, we're going to stop here because I literally can't. I feel like I need to go journal or like meditate. I need to go think through this whole thing. I need to read your book 14 times.
Yep.
Y'all need to go pick up a copy of this dang book and read it and go out there and get your world-changing life started. I like follow that green light that Mary just lit for us. I truly cannot tell you like how impactful this conversation has been for me. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Like,
thank you for having me.
So I would love to know as we wrap up and and let people go onto their phones from this podcast and buy your book. I would love to know, like, where do you see your journey going next? Like now, not necessarily like what's next, but like, how do you see this journey unfolding for you in the future and continuing to share this impact?
Yeah, I love that question actually, because I can remember, teaching like photography workshops here at the house or it being at conferences or something like that. And the conversation would kind of turn to this. And I would say, like, actually, the real dream is writing books. I know that's where I'm ultimately headed. I know I'm going to do that. So when Dirt came out, and then with each book that comes out, I have somebody saying, I remember when you said this at a workshop and now you're doing it. Yeah. And so I think that like, there are a few acts of like radical disobedience and like radical, revolt or resistance we can do to fear. And one of them is to put our work out into the world and call it good. The numbers 2-1 is to accept a compliment for what we're doing and what we stand for and what our work is and say thank you as if it is a complete sentence and not be like, oh, well, I don't know. So I got to work on that part a little bit. Well, I'm just not really sure.
How dare you?
Thank you. And number 3 is to cast a vision about where we are headed, even if somebody else thinks it's ludicrous at the time. Even if I've said on an interview recently, I said on an interview recently that the goal for this book was nothing short of generational change. That it was to create, my friend Hannah Brincher talks about a Sharpie mark through the calendar. This would be a Sharpie mark through the family tree. That there will be a before you and an after you, because this book is most target audiences for the hard story people, where something in our stories told us it's not safe to trust anyone, including ourselves. And the interviewer was kind of like, oh, well, I guess it's good to dream big, kind of dismissed it a little bit in sort of dude-like fashion. And I just, I just didn't even like acknowledge that, because I know who I am and I know where I'm headed and I know what this book is capable of. And I mean it when I say it's going to produce life change. If you read this book start to finish, it makes good on this promised arc of transformation where I truly believe family trees will be different afterwards. That generation of women, when they get set free of fear, they're going to sprint towards the work they were called to do. Mm-hmm. So that's number 3. So to answer your question now, 45 minutes later or whatever, I'm going to cast a vision for where I'm headed. And that is that I think about that Oliver Wendell Holmes quote, and I do the math where like maybe I can release a book every 2 years on average, and how many years I have left optimistically. And let's say I have 20 more books and 40 more years of writing. I don't know, that's maybe a stretch. I would be 85 at that time. Who knows? That doesn't feel like enough. Right? I have so many books in me that I want to get out into the world. So I kind of feel like I will be somebody on my deathbed going, wait, write this down. Here's one more sentence. So I hope to write books for the rest of my life. I hope to speak to stadiums. Maybe there's a Netflix special in there. I don't know. We'll see. Who knows? Hell yeah. I feel like, looking at breadcrumbs, looking backwards, I always knew I wanted to be an author. And I wrote down when I was like 7 or 8 years old, I wrote a note to my grandma Goldie put in her safety deposit box at the bank that said, I will be the next Barbara Walters and I will make $1 million by the time I'm 40. So, not Barbara Walters yet, but I do wonder what that breadcrumb means, Yeah. And I'm podcasting and doing these interviews. It feels like I'm putting in reps and building muscles. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that one means yet, but there's something there in the hosting interviews on a large scale.
I love this. I feel like there's so much power in casting a vision and having it be big. And also, like, it's funny that you share that in the most, when you said the host was a little like dismissive and a little dude. And it's like, that tells me that person has no, like, they cannot relate to the generation that needs the generational change.
Wow. Yeah.
That's 100%. What that tells me. Because as somebody who, first generation immigrant, I have my own story that, again, like completely different than yours, but parallels in feeling. Mm-hmm. I'm like, hell yes. Like this is a change. This is a changing moment. This is a moment where I'm like, I don't need to keep my head down. Mm-hmm. I was brought here for a reason. Yeah. And sacrifices were made in the generations before me. And this is going to be the time that I change things for the generations after, impacted by people like you. And
it's giving me like head to toe chills right now.
I mean, but that to me tells me so, and also that speaks to me. I'm like rambling. I'm like trying to end this episode like 20 times, but I feel like so fired up because I'm like I'm thinking about this host out there and people listening to him and being like, no, don't listen to him. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what it's like for people like us.
That's right. Yeah.
So
But that goes back to what I was saying earlier about you have to get to a place, you have to do the internal work where you know who you are, you know where you're headed, you know what you're capable of, and you know what your work stands for. That stuff like that just
in your
roll. I mean,
life.
honestly, I'm like,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't care if you don't see
Yeah.
it. There's a script I use in the book actually for people like that and moments like that. That's okay. You'll meet them later. You'll see
I
that later.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. And also, like, it also goes to prove your point of you are needed even more to, negate what it is that they're putting out there.
That's right.
To fight against that and to be the place for the people who need it. So I think that's incredible. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom. I'm going to go read the book. I'm going to go read the book right now. I've already started it, but I'm going to have to finish it this week. It's going to be one of those like no sleep.
Love it. You can
That's
live
how I read. That's how
blog
I
it,
read books. Yeah.
live Instagram it as you go, live story it.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Mary.
Yeah, thanks for having me. For everybody listening at home, namethefear.com. If you head over there, we have the whole first chapter for you. You can download and read for free. And we also have our achiever quiz there you can take to find out which achiever type you are: performer, tightrope walker, masquerader, contortionist, or illusionist in the distance, because it determines a lot about how you play small and where you go from here.
Yeah, y'all go take the quiz and share the results on Instagram and tag us, because I want to see what you guys get on the quiz, and I'll share my own as well.
Yeah, at Mary Marantz on Instagram, Marantz.
People already follow you, Mary. Like, yeah, everybody already follows you. Just trust me. But we'll also have everything linked up for you guys in the show notes, so make sure to check those out. All right, you guys, I'll see you next week on the next bite-sized episode of the Layli Madi podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Layli Madi podcast. If you found value in today's episode, it would mean the world if you would leave a review or share it with a friend who's on their journey to becoming an industry educator or speaker. Want more support as you grow? Head to laylimadi.com for free resources and more information on how we can work together. Until next time, keep showing up, keep sharing your voice, and keep leading with purpose.